the last part, we left off on the 28th of October, 1939. I apologize for misspeaking the last part by saying November. Anyway, the Admiral Graf would meet up with the auxiliary vessel Altmark to refuel and transfer prisoners from the last vessel they sunk, the Trevenant. Captain Langsdorff of the Graf had some operational decisions to make. For the past 2 months, his ship had been sinking merchant vessels while crisscrossing the South Atlantic Ocean, sinking 4 out of 5 of those merchant vessels in the Freetown Cape trade route, and it was very probable that the British would concentrate their search in that area. So, with the responsibility of his crew and the duty to his commerce raiding mission, he decided to head around the Cape of Good Hope and take the Admiral Graf into the Indian Ocean. Now, this decision was influenced by a signal the ship received telling them to consider entering the Indian Ocean. Langsdorff would arrange for 4 provisional rendezvous with the Altmark, with the last one being on November the 26th. The Graf would enter the Indian Ocean on the 8th of November, operating east of Durban in South Africa and south of Madagascar. Sending out the Arado 196 to search the surrounding area, and after 5 days of searching, Langsdorff and the Graf would come up empty-handed. Up until this point, the Graf had not been targeting neutral shipping, but at this point, he felt that it was critical that the British be alerted to his presence in the Indian Ocean, and cause them to divert their forces. He would take his cruiser to Mozambique, if that failed, heading to South Africa to attack coastal traffic, and possibly using their aircraft to attack Durban. By November the 14th, the Graf had reached the coast of Mozambique, then a Portuguese colony. During that night, while going through rough seas, they would spot a small ship. It turned out to be a Dutch coaster, which are shallow-hulled vessels used for trade between islands or on the same continent. Langsdorff decided to leave this vessel alone, since it was neutral. However, the Graf would not have to wait too long for their next action. The following day, a steamer came over the horizon, heading towards the Graf. This time, the 5.9-inch guns would be loaded, as the Trevenant proved that machine guns weren't enough of a deterrent to stop a wireless transmission. This time, the steamer suddenly turned away and headed back in the same direction that she had come from. And Langsdorff would order the Graf to speed up and had one of the 5.9-inch guns fire off a warning shot. The steamer turned out to be the 706-ton Africa Shell, which decided to slow down after the warning shot fired by the Graf. Like previous ships the Graf had encountered, the captain of the Africa Shell had the confidential papers thrown over the side of the ship. In similar fashion, the crew of the Africa Shell were given 10 minutes to gather their belongings and abandon their ship before the Graf would sink the smaller steamer. The Africa Shell was sunk with scuttling charges. Now, as the Graf was leaving the scene, another ship was spotted, which turned out to be a Japanese ship that was allowed to pass unmolested. An interesting thing to note is that a majority of the crew from the Africa Shell was allowed to go to shore, while some were put on the Graf. Anyway, the Graf headed northeast until they were out of sight of the coast, and then altered course again to the southeast, spotting one more vessel in their Indian Ocean adventure, which was a Dutch ship that was allowed to go on its way. Langsdorff's next move would be based off the assumption that the Africa Shell's crew would be interrogated, and based off the descriptions, the British would identify it as the cruiser. Langsdorff decided to double back and head into the Atlantic, staying away from the coast, fearing the British would take the shortest route possible around the Cape, hoping to keep the Graf around 500 to 600 miles off the coast, which should avoid any of the British vessels searching for them. The Graf would enter the Atlantic by the 20th and set course for the last of the 4 rendezvous points with the Altmark, meeting up on the 26th of November. The Graf would refuel and take on other provisions. Langsdorff wanted to ensure the ship would be supplied and refueled to ensure the ship could operate until February of 1940. Langsdorff would take a look over the ship during this time. The main armament was in good working order, and the ship had plenty of fuel stores, but the marine growth on the ship's bottom was getting out of hand, and the machinery was not in great condition and in need of an overhaul. But taking some time to rest and enjoy themselves, some of the officers from the Graf and the Altmark had a large party, inviting the captain of the Africa Shell, and made sure to make a toast to his health. One of the things Langsdorff had to keep in mind while operating in the South Atlantic were the instructions he received from Germany, which was to ensure the enemy would not obtain any prestige from the sinking of the German vessel. Now, due to the state of the machinery, the commerce raiding mission was coming to a close. Now, coming from Dudley Pope's The Battle of the River Plate, Langsdorff wrote, "In consequence, the necessity for avoiding action damage could no longer be so pressing. So, when it came time for an engagement, the Graf would close the range, and it could be expected that the ship's powerful armament would at least damage an opponent." Langsdorff would also add, quote, "On the other hand, it would be difficult to achieve decisive results or shake off a fast shadower in the bright moonlight nights of the South Atlantic." Langsdorff would finish off his entry by saying that with a minor machinery overhaul, the Graf could operate in the area of the Cape Freetown trade route until about the 6th of December. Then, based off the state of the machinery, the Graf Spee would either return to home waters or operate against the River Plate traffic. Over the next couple of days, the crew of the Graf Spee would alter the appearance of the pocket battleship, first by scraping the rough spots off the hull, and then by painting it different shades of gray. Next, they would rig up a dummy funnel and a dummy forward turret, as to appear more like a British battleship. So if a neutral ship saw them, and were asked if they saw the Graf Spee, they would describe seeing a ship with 2 smokestacks and a double forward turret, and hopefully based off that, the British would think it was Repulse. They would next paint the name Deutschland on one side of the stern, and on the other side it would be the Admiral von Scheer. This was to also confuse neutral ships. On the 29th of November, the Graf Spee would leave the company of the Altmark after giving the ship new positions for a meeting in December. The Graf Spee would head east-northeast for the spot where the Trevenant had been sighted, but this spot would not yield any new merchantmen for the next couple of days, and by December the 2nd, Langsdorff was ready to send up the Arado 196 again to spot for the pocket battleship. By midday, the Graf Spee's lookouts would spot smoke over the horizon. Heading into this action, one new precaution the Germans would take would be to switch on a Marconi radio set, which had been taken out of the Newton Beach, to make sure for certain if the unknown ship would try to send out a report, and use it to try to jam the transmission. By 1:37 p.m., after increasing speed and catching this fast and larger steamer, a warning shot was fired and the signal stop was sent. Several minutes later, the sailors assigned to monitoring the merchant vessel's radio traffic reported that the ship had been sending up messages. Langsdorff had the signal flashed over, no wireless. This did not deter the merchantmen either, so the Graf Spee's radiomen started jamming, and a 37mm gun aboard the Graf Spee fired some more warning shots. But again, this did not stop the radio transmission. Some good news for Langsdorff was that the jamming was thought to be successful, and because the ship was so much larger than anything else the Graf Spee had caught and would be a good prize, and thus Langsdorff didn't want to shell the ship anymore. The Graf Spee would send over a boarding party to what turned out to be the Doric Star, a 10,086-ton steamer, which was carrying products of the cow variety. Something that would make Langsdorff's plans difficult to accomplish was the fact that the Doric Star's chief engineer damaged the engines of the steamer, so she could not get underway. With this, Langsdorff ordered the British crew off with some of the provisions, and had the ship scuttled, finally sinking beneath the waves by 7:10 p.m. Another thing that made Langsdorff's position rather tough was not being sure that jamming of the Doric Star's report had been entirely successful. The Graf Spee would head southwest at high speed. This is where we'll leave off with the Graf Spee, heading southwest. In the next video on the series, I hope to cover the Battle of the River Plate, of which might be a week with a single video, because I have a feeling it might be a longer one. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you have enjoyed watching this video, and please remember to like and subscribe, as it will help the channel to grow.